Over the last few decades, a new kind of empire has expanded across the globe, reaching into more than 100 different nations. This expansion didn't rely on military hardware. It was built entirely on economic leverage and the creation of deep trade dependencies. For India, the physical evidence of this strategy is right at the front door. A series of massive, foreign-funded ports now sits along its maritime borders, creating a strategic circle that limits India's room for maneuver in its own backyard. For years, the conventional wisdom was that India had to fight back by becoming the next low-cost factory for the world. But the window for that kind of labor-intensive, cheap manufacturing has largely closed. Trying to compete on that old battlefield is a trap India can no longer afford to set for itself. To achieve a $10 trillion economy, India is moving past the factory floor model. It is now executing a different playbook, one that targets the high-value choke points of the future rather than the assembly lines of the past. The first playbook relies on a specific kind of infrastructure lending. Developing nations are offered billions for massive projects like airports and railways that look impressive on a map, but often lack the local traffic or industry to ever pay for themselves. This is the Hambantota port, a world-class facility, yet sits largely silent, generating a fraction of the interest owed. When payments fail, debt is traded for sovereign control. Strategic assets are handed over to the creditor, turning commercial loans into territorial footholds. India's development diplomacy targets a different level of need. Instead of empty ports, it invests in the basic tools of a functioning society: digital payment systems in Rwanda, agricultural productivity in Ethiopia, and power grids in Afghanistan. While one model builds leverage through financial failure, the other creates a network of functioning essential services. By solving these core problems, India establishes itself as a partner that gains influence by making allies more capable, not more indebted. This same focus on strategic utility is how India plans to bypass the monopoly on rare earth minerals. Despite the common narrative, these minerals aren't actually rare. The bottleneck isn't the mining, but the massive industrial scale required for refining and processing. In business, this is called the smile curve. Profit is usually found at the ends, extracting raw materials or marketing the final brand. But by monopolizing the low-profit processing phase at the bottom, one nation makes the world entirely dependent on its factories. India's counterplay is value manufacturing. Instead of chasing the bottom of that curve with cheap labor, India uses its skilled workforce to focus strictly on high-end sectors, like advanced petrochemicals and the complex electronics required for electric vehicles. India has successfully used this logic before with the Jamnagar refinery. Without owning the oil fields, India built the capacity to take any crude on the market and convert it into the high-spec fuels needed by every modern economy, demonstrating that strategic control is found in processing power, not just resource ownership. To break a monopoly, you don't need to own the mine, you just need to own the hub where the material becomes useful. India is now scaling that Jamnagar model to the next generation of strategic minerals. The next great monopoly is being built in the field of artificial intelligence. Because AI requires massive amounts of computing power and energy, control is rapidly centralizing into the hands of a few global giants. For most nations, this creates a new kind of dependency. Global platforms harvest local user data to train their proprietary models and build surveillance networks, leaving the local population with very little control over how their own information is used. India's immediate response is the concept of sovereign AI. The goal isn't just to build the biggest model, but to develop specialized small language models trained on local data to solve local problems, ensuring that the insights generated stay within the country. We are seeing this take shape through partnerships like the recent tech alliance with France. Together, they are developing AI and robotics specifically for non-invasive cardiac surgeries. This surgery project serves as a proof of concept for a broader strategy. If India can use its fast medical data to automate complex procedures, it can provide those same systems to countries facing a shortage of surgeons. India already possesses the scale to act as a global disruptor. If it chose to prioritize its own goals over international climate or trade agreements, it could single-handedly derail global supply chains or carbon targets. For decades, the dominant economic model in the region treated a massive population simply as an input, a resource to be consumed as cheap labor for foreign manufacturing. India's current strategy treats its population as human capital. By investing in its people as innovators and digital creators, India is betting that sustainable influence comes from generating knowledge, not just following assembly instructions. The global race of 2050 won't be won by the country with the most factories or the largest population alone. The advantage will go to the nation that achieves the highest level of technological and industrial sophistication. By becoming the primary source of the knowledge and technology used across the developing world, India makes its own prosperity a prerequisite for the growth of its partners. Global stability will increasingly depend on India's ability to